Good afternoon, everyone. I must start with an apology that last week my sermon never really worked out, but everything is beshert, and it allows me to talk about a few things together this week, including the very sad passing of Rabbi Lord Gerald Sacks, Zichron Tzadik Livrocha, last Shabbos, which has shaken all of us, particularly his rabbis. We also marked Remembrance Day this week, amongst other things. And of course, about just over a week ago, our shuls once again closed their doors for lockdown. So very trying times in many ways. But we'll start as we always do with a prayer. Psalm 121. If you have a singer's prayer book, page 510. Then we'll say a prayer for all those we know who are unwell. And those we don't know also. Everyone should have a refuah shalema, a speedy recovery. On a happier note, we wish Mazel Tov to Andrew and Jonathan Seymour, Carly and Russell, on the birth of a son, a grandson for Andrew and Jonathan this week. We also wish Mazel Tov to uncle and aunt, Daniel and Cassie Seymour, and cousin Jensen. Lovely news. And to Philip Abro and Philip Lester on their birthdays. Apologies for the disruption. We start with Psalm 121, page 510. Shalom alois, eso einai el harim, Me'ayin yavo Ezri me'yim Adonai, Oiseh shamayim v'oretz, Al yitein lamoid raglecha, Al yanum shoimrecha, Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan, Shoimei Yisroel, Adonai shomerecha, Adonai tzilcha, al yad yaminecha. Yoimam hashemesh lo yakeka, v'yoreyach b'layla. Adonai yishmorecha, mikol ra yishmor es nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzeitzcho v'yecha, me'ata b'yad olam. Mishmach hamsin v'tzyakim ma'ishim lo v'shon v'raychis chanach ben blimla, v'yetz Yisroel ben Miriam es Chayfa yivas pesha, v'yetz Azariah Yonatan Shimon Shmuel ben Leoni, v'yetz David ben Chana Beila, v'yetz Chaim Tov David ben Chayleah, v'yetz Baruch Shimon ben Freida, v'yetz Shem ben Chan Liba, v'yetz Wolf ben Pauline, v'yetz Shlomo ben Mindel, v'yetz Yonasan ben Miriam, v'yetz Mordechai David ben Cyril, v'yetz Yaakov ben Miriam, v'yetz Michal ben Henya, v'yetz Yonasan ben Sora, v'yetz Kasriel ben Freidel, v'yetz Baruch Michal ben Rachel, v'yetz Baruch ben Tovachai, v'yetz Shmuel Reuven ben Nechama Esther, v'yetz Shmuel Yehuda ben Canaan, v'yetz Yirmiyahu ben Sora, v'yetz Yisrael ben Chana, v'yetz Avram Shraga ben Sora Tevora, v'yetz Yisrael Isaac ben Yehuda Rachel, v'yetz Pesach ben Shei Negita, v'yetz Nasan ben Shoshan, v'yetz Meir ben Malka, v'yetz David ben Tova, v'yetz Asher Masa ben Sheva, v'yetz Moshe ben Shifra Rachel, v'yetz Cham Eliyahu ben Perol, v'yetz Chaim Chaykel Meir ben Chana, v'yetz Orit bas Aviva, v'yetz Miriam bas Netam, v'yetz Esther Chana bas Tevora, v'yetz Esther bas Rachel, v'yetz Francis bas Herschel, v'yetz Leah bas Karen, v'yetz Yael bas Sor, v'yetz Tevor bas Gittel, v'yetz Simon Masha bas Yachov, v'yetz Thomas bas Chai Liba, v'yetz Yudis bas Bein, v'yetz Shein bas Sora, v'yetz Chana bas Tevora, v'yetz Gershon Vadi ben Chanina, Ba'avor Shem Ratzlaka Ba'avaram, v'yetz Chazak Yishbarach Yachavim Aleim Lachim La'pois L'machazik L'chesam, v'shlach le'em re'im v'refuah Shem Shalom v'chovim v'chogidem, Soshchad v'sirufuz nefesh v'zakov, Hashtam v'gazon kariv v'neima. Amen. Strong life to those with the outside this week as follows. This Shabbos, Esther Roll Bloom for her brother, Susan Eston for her mother, Shirley Mandel for her father, and Rachel Mockton for her brother. On Sunday, Lawrence Cohen for his nephew, Mona Lazarus for her mother, Marion Manning for her husband, and Adam Wershaw for his father. On Monday, Francis Check for her husband, Uri Cohen for his brother, Sharon Shepherd for her mother, and Ben Tobin for his father. On Tuesday, Mark Lewis for his father. On Wednesday, Louis Lester for his mother, and Alan Weinstein for his sister. On Thursday, Cecily Burke for her husband, Ian Napa for his mother, Gary Pearl for his father. On Friday, Michael Bentley for his father, Philip Castle for his mother, and Ruth Drake for her husband, Harold Weinberg. Wish everyone long life. Chaim Aruchim. El Malarachamim, Sheichim Bamreimim, Amatem Nuchanachan Atam Vashchina, V'ma'alois Kedoshim Terem, Gazarkim Asirim, Es Nishmai, Simcha Mordechai Ben Moshe, Es Moshe, Ves Michal Levish ben Yosef HaKohen, Ves Chaim Yaakov ben Avram, Ves Hirsch ben Eliezer, Ves Zion ben Shimon HaKohen, Ves Yosef ben Ephraim HaKohen, Ves Shimon ben Binyamin, Ves Chaim ben Tzvi, Ves Aaron ben Reuven, Ves Rivka bas Moshe, Ves Simcha ben David, Ves Tzvi Meir ben Avram Nosson HaLevi, Shalchu Loilamam, Ala Bachamim, Yaserim B'Seisek, and Vavi Oilamim, V'yitzor B'Tzacham Es Nishmas, Madnoi Nachal Asam, Yanechu B'Shem B'Shkov Esam, V'Neimar, Amen. We will conclude the prayers with a memorial prayer for all those who gave their lives in defense of this country as we march Remembrance Day this past Wednesday. Adonai Lamim Zechores Nishmos Kol Anshe Chayil She'aru Lamos Nafsham Ba'artzam Ves Nishmos Sheishes Million Acheinu B'Achei Yoseinu Akdoshim V'Atorim Anu Balaracham Imaserim B'Seisek V'Echal Yoilamim Utzero B'Tzacham Es Nishmosam Adonai Nachlasam V'Yanuch B'Shlom Mishkavoisam V'Neimar Amen. O Lord of compassion, in whose hand are the souls of the living and the dead, we pray to you to remember those who gave up their lives in service of this country, together with the 6 million of our brothers and sisters who were murdered in the Shoah. May their memory be blessed and their sacrifice not have been in vain. Shelter them under the protection of your wings forevermore. May their souls be bound up in the bond of eternal life. Implant a new heart and faithful spirit in the peoples of the world, that we may speedily witness an end to all wars and suffering. May you spread the tabernacle of your peace upon all the dwellers on earth, and let us say, Amen. And when this goes out on video, at the conclusion, there'll be a segment with Gerald Nathanson also speaking about Remembrance Day. Recently, about, I think, a month ago, possibly even less, the news was shared with our community and with the Rabbonim and the Rebbetzins that Rabbi Lord Sacks was unwell with cancer. It was apparently the third time he'd had it, and he'd beaten it twice, and asking us to pray for him. He was continuing to give his weekly covenant conversation. He'd just come out with a book, and I don't think any of us imagined how serious it was. And yet, very, very sadly and tragically, and for many of us relatively suddenly, last Shabbos morning, he returned his soul to his Maker. I have to say, for the first decade of our rabbinate, Rabbi Sacks was chief rabbi, and whilst he had many titles, professor, sir, doctor, and later Lord, amongst the rabbis he always said, I'm just Rabbi Sacks. I'm not sure how much we appreciated, until really this week, the pastoral care that he gave to us as his rabbis and rebbetzins. And whilst he'll be remembered for his writings and his teachings and his Torah and his guidance to so many, from the royal family through prime ministers, through members of the public and members of the Jewish and wider community around the world, for us, he was a personal figure as well. And it's that I want to just share a few thoughts and tie that into what I wanted to speak about today. A couple of my colleagues have commented that amongst all the tributes that have poured in for Rabbi Sacks from members of the Jewish community, and particularly the rabbinate, people haven't focused on his scholarship and his teachings. As brilliant as they were, they focused on how he cared for individuals and how warm and compassionate he was, and how he always had time to give advice to us. I must admit, certainly when he was chief rabbi, I didn't think of him so much as a communal rabbi type figure. He was more a figurehead, an orator, somebody who was our ambassador, our spokesman to the outside world. But I didn't actually quite realize, until really I had time to reflect on it this week, that he may not have been as involved in the nitty-gritty of the Jews in the pews, as I say. And I don't know, he may well have been. But certainly those who he encountered and those who interacted with him spoke of his care, his compassion, his devotion to each person he came into contact with. And certainly that was particularly felt by his rabbis and rebbetzins. I remember in my early years, I've grown a slightly thicker skin since then, but there'd been a shul AGM and some criticism had come up. Someone didn't like, I don't know, the rabbi's jokes, or probably something more serious than that. And it really crushed me as a young rabbi, first or second year in the job. And I think at the same time, my parents went to hear Rabbi Sacks speak in Oxford, in their hometown. And they mentioned that their son was a rabbi, and maybe I told them I was feeling a bit down. And he gave them his home number and said, please pass this on to your son, tell him to call me. And I called him at home, and he was wonderful. And I told him what was going on, and he immediately, without missing a beat, said, Mordechai, what does the Megillah say about Mordechai? So I said, well, I don't know, Rabbi Sacks, Chief Rabbi, what does the Megillah say? And he told me, I remember still in his wonderful booming voice and with such care, he said, it says that Mordechai, even though he was a leader, he was Rotzi the Rov Echav. That means the majority of people liked him. He said, Rabbi Wollenberg, if Mordechai in the Megillah couldn't even get everyone to like him, then there's no hope for anyone else. Be happy that the majority are happy with you. And that actually, not so much the words, but the tone in which it was delivered and the love and care. And he followed up with some contact after that. Kept me going for many years until I learned in the Talmud why some people didn't like him, because he was too political, apparently. But that's besides the point. And there are many other stories like that have come out, where Rabbi Sacks was just there for you. Many times when someone was going through something, he would say, I'm with you, I feel your pain. And that often sounds like a cliche, but I've now heard in the past week, for many people, that was genuine and sincere. And he would call people afterwards to check they were okay, to see what had happened. Even when he was chief rabbi, he was always available to all of us, particularly his rabbis and rebbitzins. And I can't think of a shir or a sermon I've given in the past 17 years that probably hasn't drawn on one of his teachings. And amazingly, he left his teachings for this year, the Covenant Conversation, which is going to continue to come out. But who knows what will be after that. We feel very bereft, both of his teachings and his Torah, but also of his leadership and guidance to us and to the wider society. Just an anecdote. When I was in Cardiff, I got a phone call from a lady with a very strong Welsh accent. Rabbi, I want to make a donation to the orphanage. I said, we don't have an orphanage. She said, no, the one in Romania. I said, I'm really sorry, I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. She said, no, Rabbi Sacks, the chief rabbi, he was on the radio, he was talking about, he was so inspiring. I'm not Jewish, but I want to give something to this orphanage. Anyway, I called his office, I think we managed to figure it out. That was the effect Rabbi Sacks had on people. Now, he often quoted the fact when a rabbi speaks, everyone thinks he's speaking to the guy next to him. When a rebbe speaks, they listen. When Rabbi Sacks spoke, people listened. And I've spent a large part of the past week listening to and watching videos and just generally following a lot of his talks. And it is unbelievable. It really is unbelievable. And the humor that's always there and the warmth. So he will be very much missed. But I wanted, and nothing we say is really adequate to pay tribute. Somebody who's probably a leading rabbi, leading thinker of the last who knows how long. It's very hard to think of anyone else that has the same influence and the same reach. And those of us who were affected by his teachings, I hope, will continue to disseminate them in the manner that he did. And I'm just wearing this yellow tie because Rabbi Sacks said in an interview that many years ago, someone said, as a rabbi, it's easy to be down all the time and miserable. You have to cheer people up. So this is my little effort in tribute to Rabbi Sacks. I think a lot of rabbis might be wearing yellow ties this Shabbos. But I wanted to share actually a teaching of his, which is very relevant to the Remembrance Day that we've just marked and to what's going on with COVID-19 and to many of the other things that we are going through, both individually and as a community. Last week, in the Parsha of Vayera, we read the Akeidah, the story of the binding of Isaac. And there are many, many commentaries on the Akeidah. They discuss from all sides, did Abram know it was a test? Did he not know it was a test? How could God ask him to do something like that? And Rabbi Sacks, in last week's Covenant and Conversation, came up with a brilliant explanation, which I think is unique. And I think summarizes the challenge that we all face, certainly since coronavirus, and perhaps longer as well, when we think about World War I, World War II, when we think about what our community goes through, when we think about what our people have been through in history. Rabbi Sacks, Zichron Livracha, said that the test for Avraham was not would he sacrifice his son or would he not. There are other people in Tanakh, unfortunately, who did that. It was quite common at the time. The test was, would he be able to cope with the contradictions? The same God that promised him that his seed will be numerous like the sand in the sea and the stars in the sky is now telling him to wipe out that seed. What's going on? Why the contradiction? Will Avraham be able to cope with the fact that faith, that God, that life is not straightforward? There are contradictions all the time. That, said Rabbi Sacks, is the real test. Can we handle those contradictions? Those seemingly things that challenge our notions already, which happen so often. If God is good, how can there be so much evil in the world? How can there be so much suffering? It's a challenge. It's a contradiction. How do I cope with that? How do we understand the challenge of a pandemic which has wiped out tens, hundreds of thousands of people, I think close to 1 million around the world, including in our own communities? Yes, there's always a silver lining to everything. It's probably destroyed years of building of communities and shuls as places of gathering. It's made people lonely. The mental health toll, the economic toll, the financial toll, besides the health toll, is immense. How do we reconcile that with God? How do we reconcile the young men that were sent to war in the 1940s and didn't come back, or indeed the 1910s? In past years, I've given a sermon on the week of Vayera where I've spoken about the fact that since the Akeidah, we've not been asked to sacrifice our sons again, except for during the war, when people sent their sons into battle. And many didn't come back, as we know. Many members of the Jewish community served with distinction. How do we reconcile these contradictions? Says Rabbi Sacks, that is the test of faith. The test of faith isn't, will you sacrifice your son if God tells you to? The test of faith isn't, how can you believe this or that? The test of faith is very simple. Can you handle the seeming contradictions? Can you still believe in God after the Holocaust? Can you believe in God and yet recognize there's suffering in the world that we don't yet understand? Can a person cope with the promise of blessings and the reality of the curses that we seem to face in our everyday life? And of course, we know everything is really a blessing, but we don't always see it. But can we handle that? Says Rabbi Sacks, that's the test. That's the great test of the Akeidah. It's not the actual binding of Isaac or the non-binding, or did Avram know it was a test or not. It's can we handle completely conflicting emotions and notions and promises from God. Avram withstood that test. The fact that he didn't question, we celebrate that not because he was prepared to raise a knife to his child. We celebrate that because he was prepared to accept his faith in God even when it seemed to contradict everything else the same God had told him. And that is the challenge of everything we're going through. It's a challenge when we remember the terrible toll that the wars took on our society and members of our community, and of course, the Shoah, those who were murdered. It's the challenge when we look around us at COVID-19. It's the challenge of our shuls being closed once again. But the one thing Rabbi Sacks always spoke about was hope. And that's the other thing. Can we live with that contradiction and still have faith? And can we still have hope for a better future, a better tomorrow? That was always Rabbi Sacks' upbeat message, was one of hope. One of belief in the human condition and the human spirit. So a wonderful clip, Rabbi Sacks was asked, do you know if God exists? Do you believe in him? He said something to the effect of, the more important thing is that God believes in us. We'll get it right as human beings. We will withstand what we have to. We will continue to have faith despite the challenges. And I'm sure we will continue to draw on the teachings of a very special man. I'm very privileged to have had somebody that was a mentor, a teacher, and despite being a very busy chief rabbi, always made time for my wife and myself and our family. And it's a true privilege to have known him. So first and foremost, may the memory of Harav, Moreinu Harav, Yaakov Tzvi ben David Arei, Zichron Tzadik Livrocha, be for a blessing, and may the millions of people, I'm sure, around the world that he has touched, may that continue to inspire. The Rabbi Sacks always spoke about the difference between power and influence. Power is a zero-sum game. You give it away, that's it. Influence, you light a candle from another candle, they both burn brightly. Rabbi Sacks lit up so many people and influenced so many people. And his legacy will be that all that continues for many, many years to come. Just by the way, many of the present generation of the rabbinate were inspired to go into the rabbinate because of Rabbi Sacks directly. Many, many people. And secondly, we remember those who gave their lives for this country, for the freedoms that we take for granted, that ironically we're not quite enjoying at the moment. And we weren't able to mark Remembrance Day in the usual manner, and the challenges that go with that. And thirdly, we remind ourselves that faith is not simple. And as Rabbi Sacks taught us, the ultimate test for Abram wasn't sacrificing his son. It was living with those contradictions of life that we also have to live with. Things are not straightforward. But as long as we have hope for the future and we realize that we can still believe and have faith even with those contradictions, just like Avram did, then we'll all be okay. I wish everyone Shabbat Shalom. I wish everyone to stay safe and well. And we look forward, please God, to being together again, safely, praying together and celebrating simchas together in the future. Take care. Shabbat Shalom.
Good morning. This coming Wednesday is Memorial Day. And it's Memorial Day because 102 years ago, on the 11th of November, at the 11th hour, the guns in Europe fell silent. And we recognize that as the war to end all wars. That is the sobriquet given to it. But since November the 11th, at the 11th hour, 102 years ago, there's not been a year, a month, a week, a day, somewhere in the world. And our boys, our women, our Commonwealth, no matter what religion, what color you are, they fought for freedom and liberty. It is estimated that that campaign in the First World War resulted in over 447 million casualties. Soldiers, servicemen, men, women, and children. It is a tragedy. So we have this memorial every year. Unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, we cannot march beside our friends. I remember this because I have family there, and no doubt many of you had your grandfathers in that campaign. And there were Jews came from all over the world to fight for this country, to the extent there were over 50,000 Jewish volunteers in the Royal Fusiliers. They had to create 5 regiments known as the Judeans. Some people called it the Schmatter Regiment because they were all tailors. Be that as it may, they volunteered to fight for this country. And I'm sure if you go to our library in the shul, you will see the memorial book of all the Jews who fought then and fought today. Unfortunately, we are still fighting for other freedoms and other liberties in countries around the world. It is today that I'm speaking to you for all the Jews and all the religions and all the colors of the world to remember this important day. I would like to say the verse which I wrote 40 years ago. I was listening to a broadcast, an interview, and the author was being interviewed. His name was Melbrook. And he is saying that on the first day of the Psalm, there were over 47,000, that is quite wrong, 47,000 casualties. And I was typing away to try and write a little story. And as I looked down at my typewriter, I saw 4 words that I had written: not me, not I. I would like to read it to you. It's called Not Me, Not I. Buy a poppy, my friend. Not me, not I. I don't want to fight today. Buy a poppy, my friend, where with prominence I'll tell of some soldiers that went to the continent. They fought in rain, they fought in mud. The poppy is red, the color of blood. Please don't say that, it makes me cry. I don't want to fight and die. Not me. Not I. With the song of the wave, they went away. Some came back, but many stayed. Where you popping, my friend? Put it on your chest. If you lose a leg in battle, they stick a medal on your vest. It makes you sick, it makes you sigh that young men, old men had to die. I didn't want to fight. Not me. Not I. War to end the wars, they said. Did they lose sons? Did they count the dead? Buy a poppy, my friend. It grows in a field where the dead are buried without their shields. I'm buried here in the field where I died, not far from the trench where I cried. I didn't want to fight. Not me. Not I. And that's been read out at various memorials, which I'm proud to say, where I've attended, not always by me, but recited by other people. But the prayer that I like to say, I don't like to say it, but I have to say it because it brings back our memory of the sacrifices made from 1918 to this present time. They shall not live as we that are left behind shall live. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. For our tomorrows they gave their todays, at the going down of the sun, and in the morning we shall remember them.